Hello and welcome to the Gaming character review. Yes, that is his name. I do not know why the English localization team decided to ditch the space or just I don't think it's called a hyphen necessarily, but a dash between the Ga and the Ming, but his name is Gaming. But the memes have spread, but anyways, welcome to the Gaming character review. Gaming is our newest 4-star character. He is a Pyro Claymore character, once again, focused on plunging attacks. He is our second plunging attack focused character after Xiao, who released in the first Lantern Rite. It took them this long to do anything with plunging attacks. He has plenty of similarities and differences to Xiao, though, in terms of gameplay and a bit of gameplay feel, I would say. And I will most likely mention Xiao plenty of times, so be ready for that. But let's get into the details of his kit, though, to see what Gaming is capable of. His attacks are not that important, actually, so there is no need to focus on them, but a tip that is correlated to them will be mentioned in a bit. Let's jump to his skill. Gaming performs an attack in front of him, but if he comes into contact with an enemy or some sort of terrain, he will then launch an upwards attack, and then he will launch himself very high. Afterwards, he can use a plunging attack that will be converted to a special plunging attack, dealing a lot of damage and consuming 15% of his max HP, and of course this attack deals pyro damage. This is the main bread and butter of Gaming's kit, and it's tied with his burst. But before we look at the burst, we need to mention that the plunging attack's damage is based on this skill's level and not Gaming's auto attack talent. Unlike Xiao, whose burst buffs his plunging attacks, and where Xiao's normal attack talent does matter, with Gaming you can skip leveling his normal attack talent because the multiplier is completely separate. Now, we're not actually done talking about this tip about the normal attacks, but we will move to Gaming's burst. This tip is correlated with another thing a bit later. So, to the burst. Using his burst, Gaming applies Pyro on him for a second, recovers 30% of his max HP, and he summons his little friend that attacks enemies around Gaming, dealing some hefty damage. After that, his little summon will fly a bit away, and then he will start returning to Gaming. When he reaches Gaming, his skill cooldown will be reset. And if you use Gaming's skill and successfully do a plunging attack, he will resummon the little thing, and once again it will try to return to Gaming, creating this cycle. Gaming needs to be above 50% HP in order to activate the resummoning. The burst has an okay 60 energy cost, but with repeated uses of Gaming's skill during the burst, you will get plenty of particles while Gaming is on the field, but that doesn't mean that Gaming doesn't need some ER. On Gaming's Ascension talents, his first talent makes it so that when you hit an opponent with a special plunging attack, Gaming recovers a bit of his HP in a small amount of time, and his second talent is that when Gaming is below 50% HP, he gets an incoming healing bonus, and while above 50% HP, the special plunging attack deals more damage, and this is another reason for why you should have Gaming be above 50% HP, although it's not a huge boost, honestly, in the damage. That's Gaming's base kit. It works, and it works pretty well. He does need healers with him so that he is above 50% HP at all times, but all in all, the kit works perfectly fine at C0. And speaking of cons, Gaming is a C6 or bust character, where all of his early constellations are nice buffs or quality of life stuff, but nothing crazy to change up gameplay or damage. And when he reaches C6 is where he gets a giant boost, because every freaking 4-star from now on is gonna have some sort of crit-based C6. They have run completely out of ideas on what to do on C6s for 4-stars. Most likely so that they don't do any mistakes and a C6 4-star is completely busted, I guess, but it has become really boring seeing just, it's C6, this character will get crit rate and crit damage to their special thing, or they will get crit rate and crit damage if they're a buffer, and it's like, really? As mentioned, right, he's very usable at C0, but you won't see a giant difference between C0 and other cons unless you go to C6. A quick overview though is that C1 heals Gaming when his summon reaches him. C2 is a small attack buff when Gaming gets healed and it overflows, so a need for a good healer is needed there. C4 helps with energy as it gives Gaming energy when he uses his special plunging attack, and C6 gives him extra crit stats on the special plunging attack as mentioned, but it does also increase the radius of it as well. That's the kit with constellations. As said, works really well at C0, just the base kit alone works perfectly fine. But the early cons and even the C6 don't add anything crazy interesting to his kit. Just a few buffs here and there, some healing, some attack buffs, and only the C6 is just a crit rate, crit damage boost. For artifacts, Gaming does have a few options, but there are two main ones, and they are Marcus Hunter and Crimson Witch. While Marcus Hunter doesn't buff Gaming as the 2-piece set is only for normal and charge attacks, he can easily get the free crit rate that it offers. While Crimson Witch is the big buffer, right, since it offers you extra reaction damage plus the pyro damage, and since Gaming uses his skill a lot, thanks to his burst, he can stack it fully very easily. You should use Crimson Witch if you're running a reaction team, but Marcus Hunter also works well. You can also strongbox Crimson Witch if that is easier, or you want to farm another. You want to farm for Marcus Hunter, but if you're not getting anything good, you'll strongbox it to Crimson Witch and whatever you get first, right? And then those two-piece combos are behind Crimson Witch a bit, and they can be good paths while you gather a full Crimson Witch or Marcus Hunter set. For your stats, your main concern is that Gaming has enough energy recharge to always burst. You must always burst in a rotation. And you can very much use an ER Sands to achieve this if you can get stats from other sources, from other buffers or whatever. Or weapons, of course. If energy recharge is covered, then an attack or an EM Sands works. EM, of course, only if you're planning to play Gaming with a reaction team. And you're sure also you're gonna get a lot of reactions. Pyro Goblet, of course, and a Crit Circlet. Substats are the same. You make sure you've got plenty of ER, and then it's crit, followed by attack and EM. Comparing him to Xiao, Gaming being Pyro does mean he can use Melt and Vape, and usually he can surpass Xiao in single plunging attack damage, like a single plunging attack dealing more damage than Xiao, that is says talking without a Faruzan. But yeah, he can do that when using Melt and Vaporize, and again, that's a good thing about being Pyro. The main thing is that using these reactions is of course much easier than needing and getting a C6 Faruzan. But also compared to Xiao, Gaming will not execute as many plunging attacks as him since he needs to use his skill and he needs to wait for the summon to come back, unlike Xiao who just increases his jump height and then he goes up and down, up and down, up and down. I also decided to try out Burgeon Gaming as just a really weird off build for Gaming. You most likely will never see anybody suggest building Gaming for Burgeon, but I have to say I had plenty of fun. He works pretty well. He is definitely an on-field alternative to Toma, but it does mean you're gonna need some really good application of Hydro and Dendro and in an AoE since Gaming has much more AoE than Toma. Additionally, Gaming's plunging attacks can knock enemies backwards, so that can be annoying with separating enemies even in Burgeon. But yeah, like I would definitely suggest having some really top tier units like Nahida, definitely for the super easy Dendro application and AoE, that really helps. And of course somebody like Kokomi can help with AoE Hydro application. But in playstyle, because Gaming needs to wait for the summon to come back, you do have some time to weave in some normal attacks. So Hydro units that like Xingqiu and Yelan, where they would apply Hydro of course through normal attacks, can work with Gaming in Burgeon. And this is like what I tested. Like I just tested two Dendros and then Xingqiu and Gaming, and I had plenty of fun. There, of course, you just need a lot of EM, but you still need energy recharge in order to have Gaming always burst. But it's a bit easier since you don't need all stats. Since you only need EM and ER, no crit rate needed necessarily. Right, you just stack some EM like main stats on your stuff and then ER substats. I know, like, again, nobody will mention to you Burgeon Gaming. But honestly, I had a lot of fun, and you'll see it in the background. You're gonna be seeing it in the background footage a lot. And it's like, it was actually kind of fun. Anyway, once again, let's moving away. Right, now that we did mention the need to vaporize and melt, right, as we said for Gaming before the Burgeon talk, let's look at teammates for Gaming. Once again, being Pyro helps a lot since you can use Anemo characters with VV with Gaming. Any of the good Anemo characters will work pretty well with Gaming. Kazuha for the extra damage buff, Sucrose for EM. I think he can't really hit enemies in Venti's ult, but you can try him out. Jan works fine for covering heals as well, but the big one, of course, is Cloud Retainer, or Jan Yun. She buffs plunging attacks, and she allows characters to plunge attack freely. Do keep this in mind, this will be mentioned later. For Hydro and Cryo, for Vaporize and Melt, the classics are here. As I mentioned, you can and you should weave in some normal attacks while you wait for the summon to come back to Gaming. So Zixu and Yellen work perfectly fine since, as said, Gaming does have the opportunity to use an attack to trigger their bursts between plunges, and with Zixu, if you stick to enemies, the rotating swords can add some more Hydro. Furina is also a good candidate because she is a free 100% damage buff, but her Hydro application completely sucks. So if you run Furina with Gaming, you need to make sure not to have any other Pyro sources except for Gaming's plunges. Or because of Furina's horrendous Hydro application, you will not vape. I have sometimes gotten away with using like Kazuha's burst, because I have C to Kazuha, he gives a good EM buff. I've sometimes gotten away with managing a vape, but it's very rare. Especially with Furina, make sure to just not use anything else, especially with Anemo characters. That's why Cloud Retainer is actually pretty nice, since she doesn't like swirl a lot. She doesn't have an off-field Anemo ability like Kazuha and Sucrose, so that's why she helps even more. But yeah, like, you need to be careful, else there's gonna be too much Pyro and you're not going to vape. And vaping with Gaming or Melt is really nice. You can absorb Hydro or Cryo with an Anemo character in order to help with application, but that can be tricky because we'll see later with other characters, other teammates. Anyway, for Hydro, other than the main three, Furina, Xingqiu, and Yellen, someone like Kokomi can be good since he does have a bit of extra Hydro application, right? Her gauges, I'm not gonna go into that, are a bit higher, but because of her range limitations, you might want to look for other Hydro characters. But there is also Melt, as mentioned. Although we don't have the gods we have in Hydro, there are still usable characters with Gaming. Rosaria works well, but she does have limited range. Kaeya works mostly at C6. Before C6 you might want 2 Cryos. Actually, you might want 2 Cryos with a lot of Cryo teammates I'm about to mention. But C6 Kaeya actually does do a good work. He does have enough Cryo application to work alone, but you will need to stick to enemies to apply Cryo to them with Kaeya. And depending on the situation, that can be pretty difficult to achieve. Diona helps to consolidate a lot of roles, and at C6 she does have her hefty EM buff, but her burst range is incredibly small, so most likely you should consider the aforementioned characters rather than Diona, or maybe, she can be your second Cryo. Layla is also very good with her shield, and she does have pretty fine Cryo application for Gaming, and if you want, you can use Ganyu as a burst bot for Cryo application, and she works very well, but this one depends on you and how you want to use her. And lastly is Shenhe, believe it or not, because her burst basically works like a Kazuha infused burst, and funnily enough, she does buff plunging attacks through one of her Ascension talents. But all of these characters, you most likely, as said, will need to run 2 of them for good uptime on Cryo, except for Kaeya, as said. So, other characters that work for Gaming, if they're not meant to be for Anemo or reactions, are of course general buffers. Zhongli is nice because of the res shred on his shield, and Gaming's best teammate is unsurprisingly Bennett. I don't think I need to mention a lot about Bennett, but the big one is that C6 Bennett changes the game a lot. And this is what I mentioned with the Anemo cast. Having Bennett on the team means that if you put Bennett's burst down, you're gonna have a tough time swirling anything other than Pyro. That's a big problem. right? Especially with somebody like Kazuha, right? Or John. Be careful if you're using John and Bennett, because if you get the Sunfire John build, right, you're gonna have too much pyro application, as mentioned, right? But that's your only way of healing with John, right? So yeah, be careful with Bennett and Anemos. And yeah, because Bennett is such a good teammate for Gaming, it becomes really tough to just swirl any other element with Anemos. But I want to continue with that C6 Bennett that I mentioned. But yeah, C6 Bennett allows Gaming to do a lot with his attacks. C6 Bennett is really nice for the pyro damage buff, but now since Gaming's attacks are pyro, his normal attack talent doesn't matter because they are pyro infused and they scale off of any pyro damage buffs. So they scale with your goblet. As such, the thing that I mentioned all the way back, this is why if you have a C6 Bennett and you plan on using him with Gaming, do level up Gaming's attack talent. Additionally, you can use Cloud Retainer with C6 Bennett for pyro plunging attacks. And once again, the talent matters, the attacks talent matters. So you can do normal plunging attacks in between the special ones with the skill. But this does come with the problem of making sure you have the Hydro application to vape the special plunges. And since you're already taking 3 spots in your team, Gaming, C6 Bennett, and Cloud Retainer, it's gonna become really tough to find the unit for the Hydro application. You most likely won't have the time to plunge and do a normal attack to trigger Xingqiu and Yellen. And remember, there are now a lot of extra pyro sources additionally, which makes it really tough. You definitely won't be able to do this with Furina, and most likely also with Kokomi. This strategy, honestly, is mostly for a mono pyro team, since Vape and Melt aren't a concern there, but the damage most likely will be lower than Vape teams. But I don't see them being less fun, or just less necessarily in damage. It's basically kind of like a Dragon Striking Diluc, honestly. But yeah, using a C6 Bennett and a Cloud Retainer, you're just gonna be plunging attacking, do a normal plunging attack, then you'll do the special plunging attack, then again this cycle goes and goes and goes, and that will add a lot of damage. Why not? Definitely a monopyro team doing this strategy will deal less damage than Vape and Melt, but I highly doubt it's gonna be so significantly lower. Especially if you use the right buffers. Gaming can also slot with Sevrus, but Overload there alongside plunging attacks can throw enemies everywhere and can result in a hot mess. But with big enemies and bosses, that's not a problem, and you can run them together, of course, if if the conditions are met for Sevrus. And those are Gaming's main teammates. You get Bennett for good energy generation to help Gaming with the energy recharge, right? Less energy recharge needed, and of course everything that Bennett brings. And then you need to make sure Gaming triggers Melt or Vaporize, and the rest is decently flexible, usually an Anemo unit. And mainly with C6 Bennett and Cloud Retainer, you can make a pretty nice monopyro team, or try to play some Vape stuff. Or it's basically an alternative to Dragon Striking Diluc, but you need to be careful again because of the pyro application. As for Burgeon, the weird shit, any Hydro and Dendro have enough Dendro application, have enough Hydro application, and then Gaming just deletes, and then Gaming just plunge attacks on top of all of the cores. It is unfortunate that because of the not cooldown, but the restriction of how many damage instances from these Bloom Cores enemies can get hit by, it is a pretty big restriction that does make this really worse. Literally, you could have 3 to 4 cores and pop them, and that could delete enemies, but it is understandable why there is a limit. But yeah, any Hydro or Dendro, and you can have some fun with Burgeon Gaming. And to finish with, let's finish with weapons. There is a decent selection for Gaming. On 4 stars, Serpent Spine is his best weapon in general, actually, but you will need a shielder for consistency and some refinements on it to really make it shoot up in terms of damage. Lithic Blade can be good, since Gaming is from Liyue. He gives a stack himself, and he has a lot of good Liyue teammates. So they can stack them. They can stack Lithic Blade and give him some good stats from the effect, although definitely with refinements. The Mailed Flower is a decent option, although of course if you have it R5 from the event that they gave it away, it is a good attack NEM stat stick. The Fontaine Craftable Tidal Shadow is also very good since Gaming triggers its effect very well. And finally, for 4 stars, Pain Slasher, as I like to call it. Rain Slasher is also very good for the EM and extra damage. On 5 stars, Wolf's Gravestone, the Unforged, and Eula's Weapon, Song of Broken Pines, are good attack stat sticks, but Gaming does have a lot of attack buffs. His Ascension stat is attack, I didn't mention this, and his C2 is an attack buff as mentioned, and he usually runs Bennett, so there are a lot of attack sources. That doesn't mean that these weapons are completely unusable and they're like shot to the ground, but these are the reasons why they are below other 5 stars. Wolf's Gravestone and Song of Broken Pines do give an attack buff to teammates, so they are preferred compared to the Unforged. Also, the Unforged needs a shielder for the big buff. Skyward Pride is a very good option for Gaming, as it helps lower a lot of his energy recharge needs, alongside its high base attack and extra damage effect. It makes it a very solid choice. This is what I used to gather the footage. It's pretty good, right? Yeah, it really helps a lot with energy recharge. The high base attack with all of the attack buffs makes Gaming have a lot of attack, even with an EM Sands, which is what I used. Like 1600 attack with nothing else. Just the Skyward Pride, you're like, wow. And then it has a little bit of all damage passive on its effect, so it's like, well, that's good. Of course, the blades are useless, but it's genuinely a really good choice that you can get from the standard banner. Other 5 stars are mostly there for the crit stats. Ito's Weapon, Daisha's Weapon, and Navia's Weapon have mostly useless effects, but they give crit stats, and that's the main reason to give them to Gaming, and that's why they are above the other attack statistics. And that's all for Gaming. He's decently fun to play, and he's very much strong. He does use the classic units for teammates, and that can be a problem for other teams. But he gets results, right? If you want to run like depending on the teams you're gonna be running in the Abyss, the Gaming might be fighting for some of these strong units, so that can be a problem, as said. But using the classic units for teammates, as said, he gets some good results. I've seen easily 100k vapes sometimes, and I'm like, damn. He's pretty easy to build as well. I like him. He's fun for testing in the Abyss now and then, but I definitely don't see myself maining him, let's say, for sure, or like really playing him out. He's in an interesting spot though, because Cloud Retainer now allows everybody to play with plunging attacks, so it's kind of a why play Gaming if she exists, and then her with Diluc is just better than Gaming. I would even say easier to play since Diluc doesn't have energy recharge needs. And Xiao still reigns king in AoE of plunging attacks and damage. And with Cloud Retainer and Faruzan, he hits like crazy. But I still had fun with Gaming. Although I do feel bad that I will need to just wait and pray I get him to C6 to see him go crazy. While especially Xiao is fine at C0 and possibly easier to get one. Easy to get a Xiao than a Gaming. So yeah, like, he's definitely in a weird spot. Again, Cloud Retainer, just everybody plays plunging attacks if they want, so it's like, why play Gaming, right? And when again, Cloud Retainer can be easier to get than a Gaming. I've seen it happen, and same with Xiao. Why play Gaming when Xiao exists? But again, he's still very fun. He's still very fun to play. I like him. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like the video if you liked it, sub to the channel to help it out, and follow me on Twitch. Next up should be the 4.4 version review. We're gonna wait a week or two for another event to pass, so that we can have like a few of the minor events. Right now, the only events are Lantern Rite and the minor combat event. So just one more event to fit it into the video, and then I'll release it. See ya then. Goodbye.